Logan's Run wasn't just a futuristic spectacle, it was a production filled with near misses, hidden struggles, and moments that never made it to theaters. From Michael York nearly walking away, to Jenny Agutter despising the costume that defined her character, to a cutscene that might have changed the entire film's emotional core, every frame had a story lurking in its shadows. Today, we're peeling back the gloss of the Dome Society to reveal the secrets, the ironies, and the tensions that shaped one of the most haunting sci-fi films of the 1970s. York almost walked away. Sometimes the hardest choices have nothing to do with talent, but with time itself. In Logan's Run, Michael York was first offered the role of Logan 5, a character whose world demanded youth and punished age. The twist? York was already 33, older than the cutoff age of 30 in the film's dystopian society. Instead of being swayed by producers or directors, it was his own driver, a passionate theater student, who pushed him to take the role. The young man reportedly argued all ride long that York was perfect for it, refusing to let up until the actor reconsidered. That persistence worked, and York embraced a part that would come to define his career. His performance didn't just capture youth, it symbolized it, making the irony of his casting part of the film's power. Sometimes legacy isn't chosen in the spotlight, but in the quiet persuasion of someone sitting behind the wheel. She despised the dress. What looks futuristic on screen can feel like a burden behind the scenes. In Logan's Run, Jenny Agutter, just 23, played Jessica 6 while wearing a sheer, light-toned tunic that became one of the movie's most recognizable images. To fans, it was sleek and elegant, a symbol of the film's minimalist future. But for Agutter, it felt exposing, uncomfortable, and distracting, especially during long shoots or in public filming locations. Years later, she admitted how difficult it was to focus on performance while constantly aware of being watched. The costume's transparency made her feel less like a character and more like a display piece. Still, she carried the role with quiet strength, giving Jessica a voice of empathy and rebellion that clashed with the outfit's objectifying design. That contrast turned her into both an icon and a reminder of the double standards women often faced in film. What fans celebrated as futuristic fashion, the actress endured as a test of composure. And in hindsight, it shows that sometimes cinema's most modern choices reveal the outdated weight placed on those who wore them. The love shop shock. Sometimes the boldest visions on screen are the most confusing to live through. In Logan's Run, the infamous love shop sequence was designed as a surreal spectacle, a whirl of bodies and desire symbolizing society's obsession with pleasure. But for Jenny Agutter, who played Jessica 6, stepping onto the set was nothing like she expected. She later admitted she hadn't been fully told what the scene would involve until cameras were rolling. What was pitched as a choreographed dance of intimacy quickly became a hot, crowded, dimly lit environment filled with extras moving unpredictably, sometimes pressing in closer than rehearsed. The atmosphere blurred fantasy and reality, leaving Agutter unsettled and uncertain of her place in the chaos. Even after shooting, the scene went through multiple edits to meet content guidelines, with versions shortened or fragmented, further obscuring its intent. Was it about freedom or control? Passion or manipulation? For Agutter, it was one of the hardest moments of the production, not because of physical demands, but because of the emotional detachment it required. Yet, what emerged on screen became one of the film's most iconic images. The audience saw a daring vision of the future. The cast remembered a day when boundaries blurred and vulnerability was hidden beneath the spectacle. Wire work wounds. What seemed like pure magic on screen was pure strain behind the scenes. In Logan's Run, the carousel sequence dazzled audiences with bodies floating toward their mysterious fate. But for Michael York and his castmates, the rigging system that made it possible left bruises, cuts, and hours of discomfort. Actors were strapped into harnesses, hoisted high above mirrored floors while lasers and fog swirled beneath them, creating a hypnotic illusion. York later admitted it was one of the most physically taxing shoots of his career. Harnesses dug into skin, circulation was cut off, and performers often dangled for hours between takes with little relief. The set itself, with its blinding lights and booming soundscape, only added to the claustrophobic intensity. Despite the strain, the carousel wasn't just spectacle, it was symbolism. It captured the film's core idea, a dazzling ritual that masked a brutal truth. Force it nearly missed it. Sometimes destiny arrives on a tennis court, not in a casting room. In Logan's Run, Farrah Fawcett appeared only briefly as Holly, a worker in the film's futuristic surgery clinic. But that role almost never happened. At the time, Fawcett was still a rising model and commercial actress, not yet the global icon she would become. One afternoon, while Michael York was on break from filming, he spotted her playing tennis nearby. Struck by her charisma and presence, he recommended her to the producers. They listened, and soon she was cast. On screen, Fawcett's red hair, wide eyes, and uneasy performance left a lasting impression, hinting at vulnerability beneath the glossy surface of the society. Though small, the role became an early stepping stone, arriving just before Charlie's Angels launched her into superstardom. By the time Logan's Run reached audiences, her posters were already hanging in bedrooms and her hairstyle was a national trend. Her appearance in the film became less a breakout moment than a quiet footnote in her rise, yet one that shaped its visual memory. If York hadn't looked over at the tennis court that day, the movie might have lost one of its most striking faces. Sometimes fame begins not with a screen test, but with someone simply noticing at the right moment. The scene that got cut. Sometimes the most powerful moments never reach the audience at all. In Logan's Run, Richard Jordan, who played Francis, filmed a tense chase through a public square that was meant to be his character's emotional climax. Unlike a typical action beat, the scene was deeply personal, showing Francis torn between loyalty, duty, and doubt. Jordan worked closely with stunt teams to perfect every movement, pouring psychological weight into the pursuit while extras were directed to treat it as a ritual of authority. But when test screenings flagged the film as too long and too heavy, the studio trimmed for pacing. The result, Jordan's most layered moment, was cut entirely. Crew members remembered his quiet disappointment, especially since he had lived in character even between takes to build toward that performance. Too old to run. Sometimes the sharpest irony hides in plain sight. In Logan's Run, society demanded death at 30, yet most of the cast had already outlived their character's expiration date. Michael York was 33, Richard Jordan was 38, while only Jenny Agutter and Farrah Fawcett were truly under the line. On screen, the illusion of youth thrived, but behind the costumes, experience told another story. This wasn't a mistake. In adapting William F. Nolan's novel, which originally set the cutoff at 21, the filmmakers raised the age to 30 in part to allow seasoned actors to carry the film. York himself later joked that he was already scheduled for renewal before the cameras even rolled. Irony aside, the choice worked. York brought real conviction to Logan's journey, capturing fear and rebellion with an authenticity that defied his years. Jordan, older still, added weight and moral conflict to Francis that a younger performer might have lacked. The contrast became its own quiet commentary. A story warning about youth obsession was told most powerfully by those who had already aged out of its rules. In proving that, Logan's Run revealed a truth its society denied: sometimes only experience can give youth its meaning. Tension behind the sparkle. Not every on-screen bond reflects what happens off-camera. In Logan's Run, the relationship between Logan and Jessica gave the story its emotional weight, a fragile trust blossoming into something deeper. Audiences believed in their connection, but in reality, Michael York and Jenny Agutter's rapport was professional, not personal. There was no conflict, only distance. York, with his classical theatre training, approached scenes methodically, while Agutter, younger and instinctive, relied more on intuition. Crew members remembered the quiet reserve between them, polite, respectful, but never particularly close. The mask scene mystery. Some movie moments unsettle not because of effects, but because of what they represent. In Logan's Run, the New You cosmetic clinic sequence reaches a nightmarish peak when a robotic laser misfires and a surgeon's mask begins to melt. The surreal imagery still startles viewers, but for Jenny Agutter, who played Jessica 6, the discomfort ran deeper than prosthetics and props. Director Michael Anderson gave her a cryptic note before filming: "Don't act, just feel the loss of identity." What should have been a routine sci-fi reaction became something more intimate, almost existential. Standing amid the futuristic machinery, Agutter was asked not to scream in fear, but to absorb the quiet horror of erasure, what it means when individuality is stripped away and faces themselves become manufactured products. The scene was filmed in heavy heat under studio lights, with technical delays and prosthetic setups dragging on. Yet the hardest part wasn't physical. It was holding stillness, letting the camera capture every flicker of dread as she internalized the metaphor. Years later, Eggerter called it one of the most haunting moments of her career, not because of melting latex, but because the film asked her to live a universal fear, vanishing in plain sight. Sometimes the most lasting chills in science fiction don't come from spectacle, but from the questions that refuse to leave us.